Today's topic is institutional repository. In the process, we will be briefly discussing about this topic, institutional repository, which is more or less the same compared to digital library. It's not very different from, not very different from, digital library. So let us see what are the things that is involved when it comes to building an institutional repository. And as we go ahead with the topic, we will try to see what are those things that is about institutional repository. In terms of hardware and software, there is hardly any different. Okay, there is no different in institutional repositories when you compare this with the digital libraries. So some of the things which is required or which may be used in digital, which is more or less related with the digital library, institutional repository, that in a very brief lecture today we'll try to cover them. Okay, so as I've said earlier, the design and implementation and management of digital libraries and repository are following a common path, following a common path of planning starting from planning to implementation and workflow process and other activities and so on. Now, the only departure comes in when you are dealing with the materials, okay, the content. When we are dealing with the content, that is where the departure comes in. That means where digital library is slightly different from institutional repository in terms of the content or the materials that we are going to upload, we are going to put in the repositories. Okay, so the digital library are mainly consisting of external materials. As we had discussed in the previous class, we said that majority of the collection, the major chunk of the collection of a digital library will come from external materials, whereas as the name suggested, in institutional repository, the materials will be mostly internal materials. That means the materials which are created and which are, made or which are uploaded by the institution, members of the institutions. Okay, so in this brief lecture, we will look at the workflow, parts of the workflow of some important aspects of the workflow for creation and use of a digital institutional repository. So the main headings are in defining the institutional practice for repository workflows, content submission, and acquisition workflows. So as we go, you will understand that institutional repository is pretty much the same, but only the part, as we said, where the participation of the member of the institution is dominating. Okay, so those part only where the role of the members of the institution and what they are supposed to do in the workflow, those things we need to focus. We will focus in this lecture. And one more thing is that as far as planning for digital, institutional repository is concerned, let us remember that the planning process of any institutional repository is no different from the planning process of a digital library. Therefore, when we talk about planning for a digital library, an institutional repository, you are also planning for the planning process. Please go and refer to the lecture on the planning for a digital library when we which was covered in building a digital library. There we have already covered the planning stage. So that particular planning process is uh, already covered, and it is common to institutional repository as well. They are more or less the same planning process. Okay, but there are certain things like access management and user, those kind of things we will cover in this lecture. Now, defining institutional practices for repository workflow involve different aspects. So in this lesson, the three main practices that we will include is user registration and authorization, content submission and maintenance, and then maintenance and software upgrade. Okay, so user registration and authorization is also done in institutional repository, but here it's also done in digital libraries, but in institutional repository, the user registration authorization focus on more or less of an institution in nature. That means we focus more on how the contents or uh, the uh, uh, the digital contents of the institution can be used, okay, by the members of the institution. Not only use but also contribute. Okay, so the contribution, institutional repository will have more of the contribution of the institution members. Then we will look into content submission and maintenance and software upgrades. So like a digital library or any other information collection, we have to specify who can use, okay, who can use an institutional repository. This is very important. Who can use this? So this is a policy decision which has to be taken care at the planning stage. So at the time of planning, we have to think of who is going to be our users, who is going to use the services or the content of the institution. Then other things follows. The moment we decide who is going to be the users, when I say who is going to be the users, is it going to be member of the institutions only? Or is it going to be a worldwide kind of usage? And if it is going to be a member of the institution or the worldwide, accessibility is going to be allowed, then we have to look into the copyright aspect as well. Okay, whether we have the uh, rights to make that kind of uses that we thinking of at this stage. And then they administer the process by which this happens. Now, the difference is that unlike most library systems, everyone in the institution is encouraged. Okay, everyone in the institution is encouraged to what? Submit materials to the repository. Now, if you look at a traditional library, the traditional library will have books, journals, which are bought from outside, which are being taken from outside. But in institutional repository, it is not like that. In the institutional repository, it is members of the institution, everyone within the institution, okay, may not be everyone, but people who are expected to submit, okay, as part of policy decision, are expected to participate actively, and their submission, the content that they upload in institutional repository will be the component, will be what the institutional repository is about. It is not going to be some external content. It is going to be the content which is created and owned by the institution. So this means that you need to think about two forms of users. As we said, everyone is encouraged, not everyone. Okay, you will have two type of users: user who can submit materials to the institutional repository, and then users who can access it. And access means access and read the materials. So we have these two users who can submit the material to the repository, who will then we have members who will access and read the material. So these are the two different types of users we have in institutional repository. So in the institution, for example, in a university, we students may be allowed to access and read the materials, while faculty members may be expected to submit or contribute to the repository. Okay, so this is a simple example. So that is how we may think when it comes to the kind of users we will include our institutional repository. So these are some of the things that is slightly different from digital library. So this is how we will be planning out, with keeping in mind that these are the things which is going to be the core process or the core of our institutional repository, and accordingly we have to plan. Since we want to encourage all the institutions and all the staff or the members of the institution to submit the materials, it must be given, to everyone. That means we should allow people to register, okay? Allow members of the institution to register, okay? Only when they are allowed, when we register them, only they can submit. So they should be encouraged, and then they should be given a registration so that they can become part of the institutional repository. This is, there are many ways of doing this registration of users of the, registration of the members of the institution. Some people did it by the email, official email of the institution. They registered it through that also. And the other practice, as mentioned here, is the registration based on the staff identity card. Okay, so they are registered in the institutional repository based on their identity card in such a way that as long as they are a member of the institution, or as long as their identity card is valid, their membership will be valid. The moment their identity card is invalid, or they have left the institution, okay, invalid in the sense that they have left the institution, retired from it, or for some other reason, they are no longer a member of the institution, then automatically the registration will terminate. So for that purpose, sometimes they link with the identity card which is provided by the institution, and then link in such a way that at the time of the expiry of the identity card, the membership also terminates. So this is one way of doing. Now, in some cases, people limit these to certain groups. For example, only to members, employees of the institution, or you might want to register them only after having attended the training course. Okay, so only those who attended a training course on how to use institutional repository may be registered. Why this is mentioned here is that without having some basic idea of how to participate or contribute or upload materials in institutional repository, there is no point in giving them registration, unless of course they know how to do. They already know without attending training, but it seldom happens. Only when they are given some kind of exposure and training to the institution, then only they can use it. So if that is the case, then those who attend a training course or orientation program or institutional repository, at the completion of the training program, they can be registered into the institutional repository. Since you want your repository to be used as widely as possible, if that is the case, you want your institutional repository not to be limited to within your institution or members of your institution, in the sense that, for example, in a university, you want, if your objective, okay, your policy decision is to allow the access of your institutional repository not only to the university community but beyond that. Okay, if that is the case, then you may like to make your institutional repository open, just like any open access repositories, so that anyone in the world can use, anyone in the world who have internet access connection can use your institutional repository. This is mostly this is the case in most institutional repository, because institution, one of the objective of creating or having an institutional repository is to showcase that, look, this is what we have, this is the kind of research we are doing, okay, in order to make a name for the institution. That is one reason. And then another reason could be you want to share your institutional content of your institutional repository with some other universities, so that there will be mutual benefit between the two. That the other institution with whom you are sharing also, they also share their contents, and you are sharing your content. That way, both will exchange the content and both will benefit from each other. So if those things are the case, then it is necessary to make the institutional repository accessible through the internet. Okay. Then, if that is the case, if it is going to be open, it's going to be accessible beyond the boundaries of the institution, then the policy, the planning will be in a different manner. When in terms of access management, what documents can be accessed, what document can be accessed from outside, what document can be accessed within the institution only, limited to the institution only. So that decision needs to be taken. So the content can be worked out. Okay, that we'll come to that later on. Now, the status of each user, example like the members of the employees of the institution, should be known, so that if necessary, access to certain materials can be restricted. Here why we are saying that certain materials should be restricted. For example, in institutional repository, we might decide that we will keep some administrative old files also, instead of making them rot physically in paper form in some forgotten cell. Maybe we want to digitize and keep it for future reference. For that purpose, not everyone should be given the right to access those kind of administrative document. Maybe the administrative staff only will be using it. Now, then in that cases, in such type of situation where you have some documents which will be accessed by only a group of members, okay, then it is necessary to have the status of each user also recorded, so that a member having an administrative status will be able to access on the administrative documents. They only will be given access to this administrative document. So this is one example of administrative document. It can be some scientific documents also, which is supposed to be shared within a group of researchers within the institution, or a group of researchers with the collaborated institution elsewhere. So likewise, the status needs to be known. So make sure you include your repository in directory so that people in the outside world can find it. For example, we have open directory, like open doar.org. From here, our institutional repository can be registered so that it is well known. So when your repository system is ready for use, the first part of the process is completed. Okay. Now, that is, once you have installed and you have make it functional, and you register users, now your institutional repository is ready for use. And the next thing, which is the most challenging part of building an institutional repository, is to persuade people to contribute to the institutional repository. Contribute, upload their materials, okay, in technically speaking, to upload their materials to the institutional repository. This is, just to say it is very simple, but in most cases, persuading people to upload their materials to the institutional repository is not always easy, okay, because there are so many reasons why they would not like to upload their materials, their contents. So some repositories may not always been successful in getting all the staff of institution to contribute all their documents. So this, from my experience as well, is a major problem in building a digital library, because that members of the institution who are expected to contribute their contents to the institutional repository, they are more or less not willing to contribute. They see it as a futile exercise or something. So this is an administrative decision. As I've always maintained, that it is an administrative uh, decision. Many uh, administrators or many the I mean in, administrators of institution or digital institutional repository, they do not understand that to make members of the institution contribute to the institutional repository is an administrative decision, which is not so easy. And because when we publish something or when we have some papers, for example, then we give the publisher, and then we give the publisher the full right. As we have said in the previous lecture, that these kind of e-contents or published materials are owned by the commercial interest is owned by or the commercial aspect is controlled by the publishers. So the authors do not have the right to upload in their uh, institutional repository. So in this case, what can be done is that a preprint can be uploaded. That is, before submitting it to a journal or before publishing the book through a publisher, the institution can make a decision, administrative decision, that anything that is going to be published should be before submitting for publication, a copy, okay, should be submitted to the institutional repository. This can be, enforced in the sense, I don't want to use the word enforced, but it should be made mandatory to all members to contribute to it. Because the difference between a preprint and a published material is that a preprint material is written by the author. Okay, no one else has contributed to it. It's only the author. So in most cases, the author will be the one who, the author will be member of the institution. If, of course, they don't collaborate with some other members outside of the institution. So basically, it will be their materials. But once it is given to a publisher, maybe a journal publisher or a book publisher, then what happens is that the publisher will send for peer reviews, okay, to some, for example, a library science professional submitting a paper will be sent for peer review to other library science professionals. Then those professionals will review it, they will comment it, then some modifications will be suggested or some changes will be suggested. So accordingly, the authors make the changes. Then it becomes a collaborated work. So the author no longer owns it. This is how it is interpreted by most publishers, that this is no longer the owner's own work. Some other work with the effort of the publisher has also put in. So therefore, the authors no longer have the right to put in some digital medium. So that kind of, problems and complication arises. So the other thing is that, many publishers expect that all publication right, ownership right, copyright ownership right is transferred to the publishers. So the author is not allowed in any verse is no longer allowed to submit or place in any form, okay, to submit it elsewhere or to place in any repository the paper which is being published. So the authors are sometimes made to sign that kind of agreement, then only the publisher accepts it. So these kind of complication also makes it difficult for members of the institution to submit to the institutional repository. So it is the job of the institution to make an administrative decision, administrative policy, that every publication, a preprint version at least, has to be retained in the institution. Why this can be, mandated upon all members is that the publication, the money or the members of the institution are salaried, they are paid workers. Okay, so the institution to which they belong, from which they draw their salary, and which is the one who which enable them to do those research, carry out those research, come up with those kind of publications. So the first right should also be with the institution. This is more in most cases people ignore this, but the rights of the institution is also there. We have to remember that. So to be successful, to have a successful institutional repository, you'll need to make sure that everyone knows about the repository. As we said, that we may create something very nice, something very functional and efficient and colorful, but if nobody knows about it, it's useless. Because if nobody knows, then nobody is going to use it. And also, everyone should understand why it is good to submit their materials. Okay, so convincing members of the institution to to contribute. So we have to convince. We have, in order to convince, we have to make them understand why it is good. It is good not only for the institution, but it is also good for them. For example, as an author, if I submit my preprint in institutional repository and my final paper is elsewhere in some publisher's website, so members of those who have access to my preprint, which is most likely going to be an open access because I've submitted in an institutional repository, then they came to know about the preprint. Then through that, they can further link to a paper which is commercially published. Of course, sometimes that doesn't happen. People just go through the preprint and then they just quote it. Okay. So, and there are other benefits as well. Those things should be known why it is good to submit the materials. Now, you will need to have a support of the institution leaders, the administrators, like deans, directors, and so on, who will encourage their staff to take part. Now, let me give you a simple picture of what institutional repository is. For example, this is the institutional repository, and then these are the members of the institution. Okay, members of the institution. So many members are there. So they are the one who submit this their content to the institutional repository. Now they are also the one who have access to the content which is being submitted. Now we can collaborate with other institutions. So here also they will have n number of users, members of the institution who submits and who have access. Okay, so when we collaborate between these two institutional repository, these groups of members of this institution will have access to the work of this, content of this member of this institution. So vice versa. So this is what is happening. So if many institutional repository is collaborating, then we have the chances of being more visible. Okay, so we have to understand this, because an institutional repository is a blank, a useless repository without the participation of the members of the institution. Unless they submit the content, it is useless. So for that, we need the support of the administrator, like we have just said. Then we also should we should also make sure that everyone knows how to submit the materials. Okay, so most of this, how to submit, the process of submitting is fairly simple in most cases, but as we said in the beginning, then they can be given some kind of training program so that they will face no problems. So this also is another policy decision. Sometimes we can have a review committee itself, so that junks are not being submitted. Some people, there will be a group of people who decide whether the material being submitted is okay or not. Then once they approve, then it is kept in the institutional repository. So we have to publicize, like the digital library, publicize a number of items submitted, which part of institution they come from. So that way they are encouraged to join. Human beings, when group of people, or when our peers, or when people who are around us did something, we also have the tendency to do it. So that is another way of encouraging. If for example, if a person I mean, we publicize that in maybe probably in the institution repository itself that he has submitted 10 materials. Then the person who is the peer of this person will see that this person has submitted 10 materials, and he or she will also be encouraged to submit accordingly. So that is why it is important. This is an important tool, publicizing the number of items submitted by individual members uh, as a way of and I mean influencing others also to contribute. Now, when the repository system is working properly, we have to maintain or manage. Okay, once this is done, okay, manage is very important, because here the submission of the content is dynamic in the sense that the institution will, I mean, the members will keep on submitting it, and the repository will keep on growing. So the number of the content in the repository will keep growing. This means that adding new features, capabilities, as you become aware of new needs are there. Most institutional repository, whether it's commercial or open software, open source software, they can be customized. Okay, one good thing is that they can be customized according to our the local requirement or local choice. The other thing is that they have versions. Any software will have versions. That means they keep on improving on the software. So as new version comes in, then new features will also be there. So a person who manages the institutional repository should be well aware of what are the development that is taking place, and they keep on maintaining and improving the institutional repository. And whenever it is the time comes, they upgrade. Upgrades are new version comes, they upgrade, then improve the software. Okay, so one should, as a librarian, one should check the information provided by the supplier of the system about the new features and how to upgrade when upgrades are announced. Uh, I mean, in open access, yeah, in open source software, there are forums in which the users of that particular software they participate in it. Even problems are shared, and then solution to those problems are shared. So there are various forums for that. So whatever software we are using, is better that we become part of that member of that forum, so that we can keep up to date about what are the new developments. Uh, and then it will also give us information about through other members, what are the new features, what are the upgrades that are being announced. Now, this is slightly different when it comes to open source software and then commercial software. So commercial software, basically we rely only in the uh, software vendor or the software developer from whom we are buying that software. So they will alert, maybe the system itself will alert that there is an upgrade, just like your Android system. I mean, for example, in your smartphone, tells you that there is an upgrade available. So like that, an upgrade may be announced. Similarly, with this open source software also, those things are there like DSPs and ePrints. But as we said, that we become more about the nitty-gritties of all these things when we join the forum of that particular software that we use for institutional repositories. So the popular today, the most popular, probably the most popular uh, open source software for institutional repository is DSpace, ePrint, Greenstone. Those are the things. Now, content submission and workflow. Coming to that, uh, what are the main aspects which are involved in content submission and acquisition workflow? So when we say acquisition and content submission, it is more or less the same, okay? Because the content of the institutional repository is acquired through submission by members of that institution. So we can look at three things when it comes to this content submission. What are those things? Creating metadata. This is always mandatory in most cases in institutional repository, because uh, unlike a digital library, we are not using some outside resources which already comes with metadata. Then digitization of print objects, permissions, and file management. Okay, so I really said that unlike materials acquired from external sources, it is most likely that there will be that you will have to make, you won't find any metadata available for your repository. Because, for example, this is an author. Okay, this author has written these people for the first time. Nobody has written it. So this is her or his creation. Then for the first time is created and never uploaded or never published anywhere. So there will be no metadata. Metadata has to be created for the first time. So that is why metadata creation is very important. So you will therefore have to provide metadata for each record. This is true for institutional repository, though it is not true for digital library, that for each metadata, for each record that is being uploaded, metadata has to be created. Okay. So you may wish to ask a person submitting. Now, one way is that ask this author about some of the basic metadata. Like, for example, like author name, title of the paper, subject. These are some of the basic things that can be taken from the author only. In the way that they have to enter those things, they have to provide those things before they can upload. Only after providing those basic information, they will be able to upload it. Now, the thing is that not all of them will be capable. Not all authors will be capable of providing the detail of the metadata. That means everything that has to be in the metadata, they may not be able to do that. That can be taken care by the library professionals. They can add those additional information if necessary in consultation with the author, confirming from the author, and then they can add it later on. So you will have to decide upon a common metadata standard. It's not that one paper has one metadata and another has another metadata. No, it cannot be like that. Your institutional repository has to have one metadata standard for one form of documents. So that decision has to be taken. So these days, as far as standard is concerned, textual content is concerned, is relatively simple. Standardized metadata formats such as Dublin Core is available. So probably we will use Dublin Core for the institutional repository as far as the text material content is concerned. So most items submitted in to an institutional repository will be provided in electronic forms. If it is newly created, as we have mentioned earlier also in the previous classes also, that if the document is created for the first time in today's world, everybody creates their publication or their materials, their research output in digital form. Nobody writes, make it a handwritten and submit to the publisher. It's always put in a computer and it is already digitally available. So therefore, make it a point that anything from this point onwards, for example, from today onwards, and all the content submitted will be in the digital form. Okay, we can do it because they have it somewhere in their laptops and their computers, so they can submit in digital form. So that way, what happened is that we save the time that would be spent in digitizing the materials. Okay, but as we said, some will be already in paper form. Some old publications will be in paper form and no longer is not available in digital form. So those things, old documents, has to be converted into electronic versions. So this is where digitization comes in. Now, digitization of these things is no different. Digitization for institutional repository is the same as digitization for digital libraries. Okay, so If we have that kind of paper, old documents which were not available in uh, digital form, then we have to digitize them. Now, what is the digitization process? As I've said, this is the same like a digital library. So it involves things like scanning the documents and converting them into a suitable electronic format. We give some example like RTF format, and then we have uh, HTML, XML, then we also mentioned about PDF. Okay, some of these are the electronic format. Then checking, and after this, we have to check and reformat the digital content. Now the problem is that at the time of scanning, some of the materials may not be very clear because the document which is scanned itself is maybe so old, or it may some coloring may have come in, okay, or it may have become very yellowish. So in this is reformatting a digital document means that we try to make it a little bit more readable. Okay, so that is what is done in the digitization process. Then one and finally important thing is that adding metadata. As we have said, in most cases we won't find ready-made metadata, but we have to add it, create it manually. Then the materials can only then only it can be entered in the repository, upload in the repository. So most documents in repository will be open, okay, available open. And so all registered users are allowed to see everything. Sometimes, for accessibility, we just make it open and then anybody can see it. But in some cases, only registered users can see it. But some restrictions for reasons of confidentiality, commercial sensitivity, and so on, or copyright issues, okay, which is legal basically. So for all these reasons, you may have to put in some restrictions on individual documents depending upon what is the what restriction is required, and which part of the you know copyright is to be implemented in that. I mean, to be copyright restriction has to be put with that document. So that restriction may be necessary. So there may be various, uh, restrictions. Only certain people, for example, as we said in the beginning, that the staff of the institution, administrative staff of the institution are may be allowed to see administrative documents. Okay, then in that cases, the restriction will be to those administrative staff only. Okay, then document may have may have restricted access for a certain time and then open available. For example, some documents like in 2000 up till the end of December 31st. Okay, let us say end of up to this, nobody is allowed to see, but we have already we can upload it. No problem with that. Which, I mean, up to the end of 2021, only member of the institution. I'm just giving an example, creating a scenario. Member of the institution can see it. After this, after end of 2021, anybody can see it. So then up to this 2021, it will be restricted for member of the institution because they are the only person they are allowed. That is a copyright, restriction. Then after that, these can be declared as open. Okay. After the end of 2021, the document can become open, anybody can see it. So it can be for a restriction, can be for a certain time period, then it becomes open. So that is one restriction. Then other restriction, document may be viewed in a particular way. For example, the document can be seen on a computer only, seen on a computer of the institution. Like we said that institution computers basically are IP sensitive. I mean, only if it is part of the institution's network, or for example, in a university we have campus area network. If the computer is within the institution's campus area network, then only it can be seen. That means that Beyond the boundary of the institutions, these documents cannot be seen. Okay, this document cannot be viewed. So that is one, that could be one restriction. So anybody who have internet access cannot see unless they are accessing from within the institution. So that can be another kind of restriction. So there are various restrictions. In fact, we can spend hours together trying to explain what are the restrictions. But we will explain these copyright restriction later in some other lecture. So these sort of restrictions can be allowed or can be managed in the rights section of the metadata. Most metadata, standard metadata have rights management. So in the rights management, see, we said from the beginning that rights is, metadata is very important because that is where you control all the each documents. So in the rights section, this kind of restriction can be kept. So can be enforced. Part of the metadata for each document in the repository will relate to rights permission. Okay, saying that who is allowed to use that particular document and under what circumstances. So depending upon the complexity of the restriction involved, then the rights management can also be as complex. So for that, the status of the users should be specified in their authorization to use the repository so that they can be given appropriate access. X user is allowed a document, for example. Let us say that give you a simple illustration. We have a document A, document B, we have document C, then we have X user, Y user, and Z user. So if, for example, X document is authorized to use all of this, Y document is allowed to use A only, Z document is allowed to use B and C, like that kind of relation, authorization of the users can be maintained. In most cases, it's not individual, it's usually hierarchical, okay? So users may be kept in somebody at the administrative level, somebody who can, administrative in the sense when somebody who administers the institutional repository can see everything because they are the one who is maintaining it. Then there are the ones who can read and upload it, and then there are the ones who can only read it, only access it. Okay, basically, these three hierarchy, these three categories are there. So most software support user restriction in such a way that the privileged user is there, medium user is there, then the normal user is there. So accordingly, what type of rights is given. Okay, so this kind of things are there, is supported by most software. Now, summing up of this, of today's class, for creating and using institutional repository, the following workflows are particularly important. Defining institutional practices for repository workflows, which includes user registration, authorization to the users, then content submission and maintenance. We mentioned those things. Then we also said that for content management and submission workflow, creation of metadata is must. And if there are print documents, printed materials which are not available digitally, those needs to be digitized. Then we also talk about permissions, who should be given access to which document, and then how we go about managing the file through metadata. So with that, we have come to the end of a brief lecture on institutional repository. Thank you for your patience. Stay safe, stay healthy.